The honourable member for Calgary-Shaw, followed by the honourable member for Edmonton-Beverly-Clareview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a pleasure to stand and rise to speak to Bill 7. Unfortunately, as we see all too often, this government seems to do one thing right and then a couple of things wrong. And one of those examples, I'm just going to briefly speak to this motion of the previous question. It can be found in the House of Commons Procedure and Practice in the chapter called the Curtailment of Debate. And, the Honourable Minister of Justice has said in good faith that he wants to invite amendments from all three opposition parties so that we can have a robust and fruitful debate. Yet, a motion like previous question just simply sets up the government to be able to invoke closure on this bill later on this week. So I question if that's not the intent. Okay, well, it just seems as though it's unfortunate that on a matter of democratic reform that the government House Leader would play a procedure like previous question to move debate along in that matter. But regarding the bill specifically, we see once again that the government has selective hearing. They once again are failing to see and take the necessary action to follow through on their commitments. Mr. Speaker, when all of the opposition parties are raising similar concerns, it should be a clear signal to this government that they've made a mistake. However, once again, we see this trademark PC arrogance showing, with a refusal to listen to the Chief Electoral Officer and his recommendations. My colleagues and I on this side of the House have issued a call for a ban on corporate and union donations, and this is a major step in ensuring fairness in our electoral system. Democracy belongs to the people of Alberta, not the corporate and union pals of the government or any other party. We also issued a call for the lowering of donation limits, and as it stands, an individual or company can donate a maximum of up to $30,000 during an election year. Now, I know that is roughly half the cost of one of the government fleet vehicles out there, but it's far more than what the average everyday Albertan can afford. What this ends up creating is a perception, not necessarily the reality, but the perception that campaigns can go to the highest bidder. And in the case of this recent election, the reality is there was an alleged donation of $430,000, and I do not believe, Mr. Honourable Government House Leader, that any one of your members would personally invite that or find that personally okay. I do believe that every one of you that sits in this House and every one of us that sits in this House has the personal integrity to understand that that is wrong. The problem is that it's unethical, and if it did happen, Albertans have a right to know. And I do think that as the Honourable Government House Leader likes to say often in this House, when someone does something wrong, it reflects poorly on all of us, as does this case. And if 20% or 25% or 28% of a party's political donations that end up forming the government come from one source, the perception is that that can be essentially influence peddling. It may not be, but the perception is there and it's real. And I just think that it's something that the government should take into consideration when we raise it. It's not that we're coming out here and saying every one of your members solicited this money and that every one of you is now bound to do something for it. I don't think any one of you probably knew it happened until it was broke in the Globe and Mail. The unfortunate reality is we're here now. Now, although the independence of the Chief Electoral Officer needs to be strengthened, especially given how the last electoral officer was sort of bullied out of his office and, the Standing Committee on Legislative Offices did not renew his contract. Now, yes, he is an officer of the legislature, but that is a government majority committee, and I do believe that they decided that they were not going to renew his contract. But even though the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General likes to talk about how the Chief Electoral Officer can make recommendations, what he fails to mention is that his government doesn't like to actually follow all of the recommendations. Now, in some circumstances, 90 out of 101 be pretty much a resounding success, as some members opposite have relayed. But it does fall short of the hype provided as we were waiting for this legislation to be tabled. There have been a number of cases of illegal donations that have been made public recently, and I think we all know which party the lion's share of these donations have gone to. This bill still fails to make those automatically public, and nothing in this bill ensures that Albertans know whether or not the illegal donations have actually been repaid. And Mr. Speaker, while we're on the topic of disclosure, which is something that this government trumpets as part of its open and transparent mandate, the bill says that the Chief Electoral Officer may release the details of investigations that have taken place over the last 3 years. Nowhere does it say that he must make these investigations public. Now, in the committee that we had on Friday, the Chief Electoral Officer confirmed that he has evidence of illegal donations back to 2005. Nowhere does he recommend to this government a 3-year time frame. That 3-year time frame was something that was either put in by the minister, the sponsor of the bill. I'm speaking. I look forward to engaging with you on 29-2A, Honourable Government House Leader, when that comes up as to where that came from. But the reality is, and the Chief Electoral Officer confirmed this at the committee, that he did not recommend that. So that means that that number was arbitrarily put in there, either by current legislation, or it was put there by the Minister or Cabinet or the Premier. Now as well, Bill 7 still fails to follow through on the Premier's promise to have a real fixed election date. Promise made, promise broken. Instead, we're left with a flexible election window that leaves the decision up to the government of the day, leaving the advantage to the government of the day, and denying Albertans the certainty of an election. Fixed election dates do work. They were recommended by the Chief Electoral Officer as far back as 2006, and our municipalities have had elections on the same day every 3 years, likely to be soon every 4 years, and the world has not come to an end. The Chief Electoral Officer suggested the cost to taxpayers was around $350,000 a month leading up to the April election, as they had to secure office space and staff for this election when they thought that there was a potential that it could happen in the fall. So $350,000 a month taxpayers of Alberta were on the hook for, just because this government decided that it was going to play politics with an election date, despite the fact that the Premier had actively campaigned on not doing so, clearly because of the advantage it offered.
Makes London look cheap.
Mr. Speaker, there are many loopholes that need to be closed. There are some glaring omissions that need to be addressed. And I'm sad to say that I doubt the PC government is going to be able to admit that they've made an error, and that they will all honestly refuse to make the changes that are needed to make this a better piece of legislation. Again, the Justice Minister has suggested he will do in good faith, look at the amendments, and I hope he certainly does. Now, one of the pieces that was inserted into Bill 7 that was not a recommendation, which must have come from the Justice Minister, was the quarterly reporting by local constituency associations. And I really would encourage the government to reconsider this, not only because of the increased volume that it's going to have on our Chief Electoral Officer, who is already busy enough as it is, but that's another 348 filings annually. And it makes sense from a party perspective. But from a local CA perspective that are generally run by volunteers, this is going to have an impact on every single one of our ridings, and it's just an unfortunate reality that you decided to stick it in there. There's no added benefit or value to Albertans for having this every quarter. Now, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues and I in the Wildrose and in all opposition caucuses are working hard to listen to our constituents, to stand up for Albertans and represent their views here in the legislature. As a result, I know there are other aspects of this bill that are good, that are a step in the right direction. Positive steps regarding post-secondary students, where previous home or campus residents can be where they vote. Better access to voting for youth living away from home is definitely something we can all agree on. And Mr. Speaker, I think we know that there is a difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. And Mr. Speaker, I came here to do what I said I was going to do and to say what I was going to do. I wasn't going to oppose bills needlessly for the sake of opposing them. And you've seen that. We've passed many pieces of legislation that were solid, good pieces of legislation. We've had a couple that we found contentious. But that is democracy. And I unfortunately cannot say the same about some members from the other side as we propose our amendments. Mr. Speaker, we need to respect democracy. We need to represent our constituents. We need to make decisions in the best interests of all Albertans. With amendments and corrections, and by listening to our constituents, I know that we'll be able to do that with Bill 7. However, without ensuring that we make the best possible piece of legislation, we will be doing a disservice to our constituents and to Albertans. Mr. Speaker, I know that PCs have some issues with numbers, and maybe that's why we can't balance the budget. But, Mr. Speaker, we all know that they have a majority in this House. And what that means, Mr. Speaker, is that they really don't have to listen to Albertans and make some changes. And there is only so much that the opposition can do, and we will do everything that we can to try and add teeth to this legislation and implore the PCs to listen to their constituents as well as the opposition and the Chief Electoral Officer to make sure that this is a piece of legislation that is strong and accomplishes exactly what Albertans and the Minister of Justice has promised it will do. I will close with this, Mr. Speaker, and we all need to remember that we came here as part of a democratic process. We came here because our constituents put their trust in us, and they put their trust in us not only to represent their views, but also to uphold and strengthen the democratic process that we're all a part of. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to the ensuing debate and the hopeful passage of amendments that will truly strengthen this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable members.